Part 1. The garden was only the beginning. There's a moment, always a quiet one, when you realize this world is more than it seems. You feel it in your bones, not just in your beliefs. You feel watched, tested, drawn into something ancient. And just when you think you're rising beyond the noise of the world, something subtle pulls you back, something that doesn't scream, but whispers. You look around and realize you are not just on a path of light. You are being tracked. The serpent doesn't come in the way we think. It doesn't always slither. It doesn't always hiss. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it agrees with your better judgment. Sometimes it wears robes. Sometimes it speaks in your own voice. And unless you are deeply awake, you won't even know it's there. You'll call it intuition or logic or divine timing, but it's not. It's deception, ancient, refined, and precisely aimed at those with a calling. We were told the story of Eden as if it were history. But Eden is a pattern, not a place. The serpent didn't vanish, it adapted. It continues its work not in the open, but in the hidden places of the mind and soul. And its favorite targets, the ones who are chosen. The ones with vision, with calling, with light buried in their bones. Because if it can twist the chosen, it can confuse the many.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But how does it do this now? Not with apples, but with illusions. Not with lies that are obvious, but with half-truths dressed in virtue. The serpent is not interested in destroying us violently. It prefers something slower, something more elegant. It wants to erode us from within. To take the truth and bend it just enough. To change the trajectory of our purpose by one small degree. Until we wake up years later, off course, confused, and wondering why our fire has dimmed. The first tactic is distraction disguised as destiny. You'll feel called to something, and the serpent will not stop you. It will simply offer you a quicker version, a shortcut, a louder platform, a shiny opportunity that mirrors your dream but lacks your depth. And you'll take it, convinced it's the same thing. But it's not. It's a hollow version, crafted to keep you busy but not transformed. And while you're succeeding on the surface, your soul is starving. Have you ever pursued something that looked perfect but left you feeling empty? That's the fingerprint of this tactic. It doesn't always feel wrong. It feels almost right, which is far more dangerous. The serpent knows how to mimic your calling just enough to get you to follow it off course. And if you're not deeply grounded in your inner truth, you will mistake the performance for purpose. The second tactic is isolation masked as protection. You'll feel the urge to withdraw, to retreat, to guard your energy. And sometimes that's wise. But the serpent twists that wisdom into paranoia. It convinces you that no one understands you, that you're safer alone, that community is a threat. And slowly, without realizing, you begin to cut yourself off not from the world, but from the very people who could call you back to yourself. Chosen ones are often wounded early. That wounding creates a vulnerability to this tactic. Because when you've been hurt, isolation doesn't feel dangerous, it feels safe. But remember, isolation is not the same as solitude. One heals, the other hides. The serpent wants you hidden not because you're strong, but because you're easier to silence when you're alone. The third tactic is pride cloaked in purpose. This one is subtle, deadly subtle. You begin to grow, to awaken, to lead. And at first, it's pure. But then the serpent whispers, "You're different. You're above. They won't understand." And slowly your mission becomes a pedestal. You begin to believe your role makes you superior. And in trying to serve, you separate. Ask yourself, do you still feel the humility of being a student, or have you secretly crowned yourself the master? This tactic doesn't aim to make you arrogant, it aims to make you untouchable. Because once you believe you can't be questioned, corrected, or challenged, you become blind. And a blind guide leads others into ditches. The serpent smiles when the chosen become untouchable, because it knows they'll fall without ever seeing the edge. The fourth tactic is fatigue disguised as faithfulness. You pour yourself out. You give, teach, serve. You keep showing up even when your soul is dry, and the serpent claps because it knows that exhausted warriors make easy targets. It doesn't want you to burn out quickly, it wants you to burn out slowly, under the illusion that you're being faithful. This is not about laziness, it's about longevity. If the serpent can't stop your mission, it will make you run it at a pace that ensures your collapse. You'll believe that rest is weakness, that boundaries are selfish. But every time you ignore your rhythms, you trade wisdom for performance. Real faithfulness includes restoration. Real devotion includes rest. And now, let's go deeper. Have you ever noticed how the serpent rarely attacks your weaknesses directly? It attacks your strengths. Your compassion becomes codependency. Your discernment becomes judgment. Your passion becomes obsession. Your humility becomes invisibility. It doesn't need to invent new weapons. It just needs to bend your gifts until they serve its agenda instead of your purpose. The fifth tactic is counterfeit connection. This is one of the serpent's most dangerous traps in the modern age. You'll find someone who mirrors your wounds, your fire, or your dreams. It feels divine, magnetic, charged. But it's not always soul-aligned, it's soul-entangled. The serpent doesn't just use people to hurt you, it uses people to distract you. To keep you emotionally intoxicated so you never find your inner stillness. Not every deep connection is destiny. Some are detours. Some are agreements made in trauma, not truth. And if you're not discerning, you'll confuse chemistry for calling. You'll stay in the bond even as your spirit shrinks. And the serpent will whisper, "This is love," while watching your light dim slowly, beautifully, tragically. The sixth tactic is spiritual language without spiritual substance. You begin to speak fluently in the language of awakening chakras, energy, alignment, purpose. But your soul is disconnected. You know the words, but not the weight. And the serpent thrives here because it knows the ego loves to dress itself in spiritual robes. As long as you sound enlightened, no one will question your emptiness. This is how the chosen become lost by mistaking articulation for embodiment. You can talk about shadow work while avoiding your own. You can teach inner peace while living in silent chaos. The serpent doesn't care how spiritual you sound. It only cares how divided you remain. The most dangerous lie is the one you tell yourself while holding a crystal and quoting Rumi. And finally, the seventh tactic is delay disguised as development. You feel the call to move, to create, to rise, but you hesitate. You tell yourself you're not ready yet. You need more clarity, more healing, more signs. And the serpent nods, yes, wait. Wait until it's perfect. But that day never comes. Perfection is the lie that keeps you from your purpose. The serpent knows it can't stop the chosen, but it can slow us down so much that we start confusing stagnation with patience. And over time, we begin to rationalize our resistance. We call it alignment. We call it timing. But deep down, we know we're afraid. We're waiting for the feeling to match the calling. And the serpent smiles because it knows that day may never come. Let me ask you this: have you mistaken preparation for procrastination? Have you allowed the fear of failing to become the reason you never began? These tactics aren't random. They're refined. I'll see. They've been used over and over, not because they're creative, but because they work especially on those who carry light, especially on those who are called to lead, to awaken, to heal. Because if the serpent can twist the chosen, it can confuse the many. And that's the real war, not between light and dark, but between truth and illusion. Part 2. The serpent doesn't need to defeat you, just distract you. The most dangerous thing the serpent has ever done is convince us that it must be obvious, that you'll know when it's near, that it always comes with temptation that looks like sin. But what if I told you the serpent isn't interested in dragging you into darkness, it just wants to keep you from the fullness of your light? It doesn't need to possess you. It only needs to slow you down, keep you confused, keep you just awake enough to believe you're on the path while never actually walking it. That's the kind of war most of us are losing, and we don't even know it. Distraction is the serpent's most potent weapon. Not because it's loud, but because it's subtle. You'll find yourself passionate about everything except what you were created to do. You'll pour your time, your energy, your prayer, your focus into things that feel important but aren't essential. You'll convince yourself that busy means productive, but the serpent knows if it can't steal your power, it will clutter it. And clutter is enough to keep the chosen ineffective. How many times have you felt the call, the inner pull, the unmistakable fire to step into something greater, and then spent the next few months distracted by the surface-level chaos of life? Think deeply about that. We often assume the biggest danger is falling into darkness. But for the chosen, the most common fall is into mediocrity, into compromise, into a good enough life that never requires the depth of your soul. The serpent doesn't need to destroy you. It just needs to keep you busy enough to forget why you were chosen in the first place. And here's the terrifying truth. The serpent sometimes uses your own healing journey as a distraction. Yes, even healing can become a trap. You convince yourself you're not ready, that you need more time, more integration, more inner work, more signs. But there comes a point when healing becomes hiding. You wrap yourself in the process so tightly that you forget the purpose. You delay your becoming in the name of becoming. The serpent applauds, because you're still in your cave, still afraid of the light you carry. We are not here to be forever preparing. We are here to step in even while trembling, even while unsure, even while incomplete. Because the truth is, you will never be fully ready. And if you wait until you are, the serpent will wait with you forever. It doesn't mind your healing. It doesn't mind your spiritual growth. It only minds your movement, because movement leads to momentum, and momentum leads to awakening, and that, above all else, terrifies it. Have you ever noticed how the moment you decide to commit to your path, chaos increases? That's not coincidence. That's spiritual law. The serpent stirs the waters the moment you choose clarity. It will use people, emotions, memories, and even your own mind to create fog. Because it knows the greatest weapon against the chosen is not fear, it's confusion. Confusion breeds hesitation, and hesitation kills destinies. One of the most insidious tactics of the serpent is to blur the line between discernment and doubt. You feel something is off, and you call it discernment. But what if it's just fear masked as wisdom? What if your so-called intuition is just old trauma in disguise? The serpent knows that if it can make you doubt your inner voice, it can make you surrender your authority. And once you've surrendered that, you'll follow anything that sounds spiritual even if it's not sacred. You must ask yourself, do I really know my inner voice? Or have I just learned to mimic the language of intuition while avoiding the discomfort of trust? Because true discernment doesn't always feel safe. Sometimes it calls you into risk, into obedience, into uncomfortable decisions that require faith, not certainty. And if you always wait for certainty, you'll never move. That's how the serpent wins by making you believe that safe means aligned. Let's talk about legacy. The serpent doesn't just want to delay your purpose, it wants to disrupt your lineage. It knows that when the chosen rise, they don't rise alone. They shift generations. They awaken others. They break cycles. So if it can keep you entangled, addicted, exhausted, or numb, it doesn't just stop you, it stops everyone connected to your breakthrough. That's why the attacks feel so personal. Because your life is not just about you. It's about everyone who will find freedom when you finally walk fully in yours. And here's where it goes deeper. The serpent studies your patterns. It remembers every time you broke your own heart, every time you silenced your intuition, every time you chose comfort over calling. It doesn't need to create new traps, it just needs to keep using the ones that worked before. The same relationship dynamic, the same type of temptation, the same inner voice of shame. And unless you become radically conscious, you'll walk into the same cycles, thinking they're new. Have you ever seen your own pattern and kept walking anyway? That is the serpent's finest hour. Not when it tricks you, but when it gets you to betray yourself consciously. That's not weakness, that's spiritual amnesia. You forget who you are. You forget what you carry. You forget that you were not made to live in cycles, you were made to break them. But breaking cycles isn't about willpower, it's about remembering. Remembering the voice before the noise, the call before the confusion, the clarity before the compromise. The serpent thrives in forgetfulness. But when you remember who you are, what you've survived, and why you were chosen, something unshakable awakens. You stop living as a reaction and start living as a revelation. Now ask yourself, what would my life look like if I remembered who I was every single day? What decisions would I make? What energy would I stop entertaining? What boundaries would I create? Not from fear, but from clarity. These are not soft questions. They are the questions that forge warriors. The serpent also capitalizes on our need for validation. It whispers, "You're not enough until they see you." So you begin to perform. You chase approval. You post, you speak, you serve, but not from overflow, from emptiness. And the more likes you get, the more hollow you feel. Because when the chosen operate outside of alignment, their power becomes their prison. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are not here to be accepted by the masses. You are here to carry something sacred, something that will often make others uncomfortable. And if your goal is to be liked, the serpent will use your popularity to poison your path. But if your goal is to be true, then no amount of rejection can stop your rise. Let's not romanticize this war. It is subtle, it is sophisticated, and it operates in the space between your thoughts. You must become a master of your mind. You must know the difference between your voice and the serpent's echo. You must speak to yourself with the authority of heaven. Because if you don't, the serpent will do it for you, and it will sound like your own wisdom. The serpent doesn't fear your light. It fears your alignment. Because light alone can be manipulated, but alignment is incorruptible. So it will attack your integrity. It will tempt you to cut corners, to compromise slightly, to serve your ego and call it vision. And if you're not vigilant, you'll end up building something massive that has no soul. Have you ever built something that looked successful but left you feeling dead inside? That's not failure. That's misalignment. And alignment is the one thing the serpent cannot fake. It can mimic light, but it cannot mimic wholeness. Wholeness costs something. It costs you your illusions, your comfort, your performance, but it gives you back your soul. So now you must ask, where in my life am I choosing comfort over calling? Where am I mistaking movement for progress? Where am I mistaking noise for truth? These are not questions for the faint of heart. They are for the chosen, for the ones who refuse to be distracted any longer. Because the serpent's final tactic is simply to wait. It doesn't need to act. It just waits for you to forget. And forgetting isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just drifting. One day at a time. One compromise at a time. Until one day you wake up and realize you've been sleepwalking. But you don't have to stay asleep. The moment you remember, the moment you decide, the serpent loses ground. You take back your pace, your clarity, your voice. And the world shifts not because you shouted, but because you finally stood still in your truth. Part 3. The bloodline of the awakened cannot be broken. There is a moment sometimes in silence, sometimes in fire when the chosen remember. Not with their mind, but with their spirit. It's not a thought. It's not a strategy. It's a deep, ancient knowing that rises from the bones and says, I've been here before. That voice inside you that refuses to die, even after disappointment, betrayal, confusion, and loss, that voice is your inheritance. And the serpent knows it can't erase that voice. It can only try to drown it. But the serpent has forgotten something. It's not just fighting individuals. It's wrestling with bloodlines, with soul contracts, with generational agreements made in light before this lifetime ever began. You didn't just stumble into awakening. You were sent here. You were chosen before your first breath. And when the serpent comes for you, it's not just because of your present, it's because of your potential, your future, your ripple. That's why the attacks feel personal. Because they are. The serpent studies your lineage. It sees every healer who came before you and died with their gift still inside them. Every prophet who was silenced. Every visionary who traded their truth for survival. And it knows if you rise, you break the cycle. If you awaken, so does your entire line. If you speak, you restore the voices of those who couldn't. That's not just spiritual warfare, it's legacy warfare. So the serpent targets your identity, not your actions, not your gifts, your identity. Because if it can distort how you see yourself, it can distort everything else. You'll carry a calling but feel unworthy of it. You'll carry power but apologize for it. You'll carry truth but dilute it to fit into rooms you were sent to disrupt. And that right there is the serpent's goal. Not to kill your light, but to convince you it's too much. Have you ever felt like your own light scared you? Like you had to dim it to be loved, to be safe, to be accepted? That's not humility. That's programming. Humility is knowing who you are and who you're not. Dimming is forgetting who you've always been. The serpent wants you forgetful, because a forgetful chosen one is harmless. But a remembering chosen one? That's a revolution in motion. You must understand something sacred now. The serpent is not afraid of your pain. It's afraid of what happens when you no longer avoid it. Because pain transmuted becomes power. Wounds healed become weapons of light. And when the chosen stop hiding their scars, they start healing nations. The serpent thrives in secrecy, but healing begins where the silence ends. This is why the serpent pushes shame. Shame is the cage that keeps the chosen quiet. Shame says, if they knew the real you, they wouldn't follow you. Shame says, you're still too broken to lead. Shame says, you haven't earned your place. But the truth is this, your place was never earned. It was given. Before your first heartbreak, before your first mistake, before your first trauma, you were already seen. Already chosen, already enough. And when you embrace that truth, something shifts. You stop leading from performance and start leading from presence. You stop striving and start serving. You stop defending your worth and start embodying it. That's when the serpent panics. Because it can't manipulate someone who knows who they are. It can't confuse someone who remembers their origin. And it can't stop someone who no longer fears their shadow. The serpent's greatest fear. An integrated soul. A human who has embraced their light and their darkness. A leader who has faced their pain and turned it into wisdom. A warrior who doesn't need to be perfect to be powerful. That kind of soul is untouchable not because they don't suffer, but because they suffer consciously. They transform every attack into alchemy, every delay into depth, every wound into wonder. Have you ever considered that your greatest battles weren't punishments, but preparations? That the very thing you thought would break you was actually waking something ancient inside you? That's the paradox of the chosen. We are broken open, not broken down. We are undone, not destroyed. We are stripped, not diminished. And in that undoing, the divine blueprint begins to reveal itself. You start to see what the serpent tried to distract you from. You start to remember the promises spoken over you in the womb. The agreements made in spirit before form. The fire placed in your belly before language. This is not poetic, this is prophetic. You are not just a person trying to make sense of your pain. You are a soul fulfilling an assignment that predates your body. But that assignment requires alignment, not perfection, not performance. Alignment. Alignment with truth, with integrity, with your soul's pace. And the serpent will do everything to pull you out of that, to make you rush, to make you compare, to make you perform. Because once you're out of alignment, you're easier to influence. That's why boundaries are sacred. Not just emotional boundaries, but energetic, spiritual, relational boundaries. You must guard your gates, what you consume, who you listen to, where you place your energy. Because the serpent doesn't always attack directly. Sometimes it comes through people, through opportunities, through open doors that look divine but drain your spirit. Ask yourself right now, what have I been tolerating that is costing me alignment? Who have I allowed into sacred spaces that were meant to stay quiet? What have I agreed to that my soul never signed? These are questions of spiritual warfare. Not dramatic, not loud but precise. Because the serpent doesn't need to ruin you. It just needs to move you 2 degrees off course. But what happens when you return to center? When you reclaim your clarity, when you reconnect to the source that sent you, the serpent begins to lose its grip. Not because it stopped trying, but because you stopped listening. You stopped feeding the fear. You stopped entertaining the lies. You stopped outsourcing your voice. And you began to lead from the inside out. This is the bloodline of the awakened. Not perfect, not pristine, but present. Powerful. Piercing through illusion with every breath. And when you stand in that kind of truth, you don't need to fight the serpent, you expose it. And exposure is enough. Because when the light is turned on, the serpent has nowhere to hide. Let's go deeper. The serpent wants you to believe that you're alone, that your path is too strange, that your thoughts are too intense, that no one else carries what you carry. But that's a lie. The chosen are many. We are scattered, often hidden, but we are here. And when we find each other, we remember at a soul level. This is the generation that ends the cycle. This is the bloodline that breaks the chains. So we must rise, not just individually, but collectively. Not just in voice, but in vibration, in devotion, in embodiment. We must walk differently, love differently, serve differently. Not to prove ourselves, but to remember ourselves. Because the serpent is still whispering. But now we are listening to something deeper. You must stay awake. You must stay rooted. You must stay willing to be misunderstood. Because the moment you become addicted to being understood, the serpent will offer you a version of truth that everyone loves but your soul does not recognize. And that's the most dangerous path of all. The path that feels safe but costs your soul. So now the choice is yours. Will you continue to play small, not because you lack power, but because you fear the responsibility of it? Or will you rise, not in ego, but in essence? Will you reclaim your name, your pace, your light, your roar? Because the serpent hasn't stopped, but neither have we. The bloodline of the awakened cannot be broken. It can be delayed, distracted, wounded, but never destroyed. Because we carry something eternal, something unshakable, something that no darkness can comprehend. So rise, chosen one, not because you're finished, but because you're finally remembering.